Hi, my name is Ruth Park, and today we are joined by Elena Coda, the translator and editor of our newest publication, My Karst and My City. Welcome, Professor Coda.
Thank you.
Can you briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. So I am a professor of Italian literature at Purdue University, and while I teach a variety of courses that span from the Renaissance to Italian comedy, my main area of research is on 20th century Italian and European literature, with an emphasis on the literature produced in the city of Trieste during the long 20th century. So that's what I do.
And could you also say a few words to introduce Scipio Slataper, who's the author of this volume, to an English-speaking audience that might not be familiar with his works?
Sure. Okay. So Scipio Slataper was a Triestine writer who was active in Italy at the beginning of the 20th century. He was very young. He died. He wasn't even 25 years old when he died in World War One. So he didn't produce a lot of work because of his death, but he really focused a lot on what it meant to live in Trieste at that point. So Trieste is located in northern Italy on the Adriatic coast at the border with Slovenia. And really, Slataper is a product of this city at the beginning of the 20th century, before World War One, when Trieste was still part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So Slataper was really young, as I already said, and he was interested in European culture and literature, and published many interesting essays and articles on border politics, cultural identity, and national identity, issues that are still so important today. In 1910, he also wrote and published an incredibly interesting modernist text, a lyrical autobiography, as he called it, entitled in our English translation, My Karst and My City. In the original Italian is entitled Il mio Carso, My Karst, but the original Italian title of the book was also My Karst and My City, and we decided to go back to the original work as he envisioned it, and so that's how we decided to call the translation My Karst and My City. The book was published in Florence by La Voce. La Voce was a very influential journal that also has its own publishing house, and that's where in 1910 My Karst and My City came out. And it expressed the anxieties and concerns of the protagonists, who can definitely be identified with Slataper himself, as he navigates and explores his own existential crisis, coming from a border city and not knowing exactly who is he, who am I, and his relationship with the modern urban environment of Trieste. It is a fragmented text that erases chronological continuity. It doesn't want to capture the totality of a particular individual, but just give you glimpses of himself and his reality, and the reality that he's exploring. The text presents his childhood memories, his wandering on the Karst, which is a mountainous plateau that surrounds the city, and then eventually the city itself as the only place where he realizes he can live a meaningful life among other human beings. And so that's what his main book is about. And it's really at the end, the importance of becoming an active member of society and not taking responsibility for its well-being and embracing the vita activa, as Anna Arendt would say.
So you talked a little bit about, Trieste and it being like a border, being like near the border. Can you talk a little bit about how Slataper in this publication discusses Trieste's cultural complexity and just a little bit about the multi-ethnic environment that was Trieste during Slataper's time?
Sure. So Trieste at that time was not part of Italy. It was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it was the most important port of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was also because of its location and because it was a major port, it was also became also an established site of major financial and insurance companies, which attracted large investment, large money from all over Europe. And with the money, of course, came a lot of people. There were Italians, Slovenes, a large and very thriving Jewish community, Greek immigrants, Austrians, Germans who lived there. Probably James Joyce was its most famous guest, right? He lived in Trieste for a very long time. He wrote some of his major works while living and teaching English in Trieste. And so in the 19th century, there was a very strong cosmopolitan sense in the city that you can feel when you read 19th century journals, articles, people who were travelers, diaries about the city. Really, there was a lot of excitement in the 19th century about this international wealthy city. But starting from the second half of the 19th century, nationalist ideology superseded the cosmopolitan identity of the city. And we start to see strong tensions between the two largest groups that inhabit the city, and that are the Italians and the Slovenians. And we see them because the Slovenians are acquiring more and more a sense of their own national identity. And so they want to be recognized also as a nation. And this, of course, clashes with the Italian national identity that is forming in the late 19th century. But while ethnic and national tensions informed Triestine politics, its culture was deeply, deeply influenced by its border status. And successful Triestines, no matter where they came from, and one can think of Svevo, for instance, they were bilingual or trilingual. They spoke German, they spoke Slovenian, they spoke Italian, and also the Triestine dialect that was pretty much the lingua franca that everybody spoke in the city. And knowing German was an important asset for the bourgeoisie, for all of the bourgeoisie, because it allowed people to have access to the Austro-Hungarian Empire and to open up possible careers in other parts of Europe. So even the Italian nationalists would send their children to the German schools because they realized that knowing German would open doors for their children. Aside from the practical needs, German and Austrian culture were also easily accessible to Triestine intellectuals who could read them in the original, of course. And so, you can imagine the philosophical works at the time, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, later Freud, also the cultural analysis of people like Nordau, Simmel, and Weininger, together with the writers, that go, from the canon, from Goethe to Kafka, found in Trieste a very, very receptive audience and greatly influenced all of the Triestine intellectuals who were active in the city at that time. They were also able, because in Germany, a lot of Northern texts were already translated, like Scandinavian texts were already translated into German. So the Italian Triestine could read them in German translation. And this is something that was not available to somebody who only spoke Italian. So an Italian from Florence probably did not have access to all this wide culture that the Triestines had access to.
Can you talk a little bit more about how, I guess, the Germanic and Slavic literature that was, almost omnipresent in Trieste at the time, how that would have influenced Slataper and his publication of My Karst in My City?
Sure. Of course, it influenced him greatly, especially the German translation. He didn't speak Slovenian, and so you see already this disparity, right, of what is considered an important language and what is not, right? But that is not the whole story, though. So he was very much interested. He was very interested in European culture, in European literature, and one of the things, I mean, you can see how much this culture influenced him is because he wrote the first book in Italian dedicated to Ibsen, the Norwegian playwright, and so he made really Ibsen available to a wide public. He also wrote essays and translation on Hebel, and translated Hebel's work, his plays, and his diaries from the German. He was interested in Otto Weininger. He was very much aware of contemporary German literary and cultural debates. And all of this is really filtered in his work. You can see in especially his cultural essays. His cultural essays are all about those figures, so it really is open to Europe. He writes about Goethe. He writes about Hebel. He writes about Ibsen. He writes about Otto Weininger. And also it goes beyond that. One of the most interesting things that probably he had planned to do, but then unfortunately couldn't complete, was the creation of a new journal entitled Europa. And he planned this together with the two of his closest friends. His names are Gianni and Carlo Stuparic, also writers on their own. And so the three of them really wanted to do under the leadership of Slataper was to explore Europe's diverse cultural traditions. And the idea was that this periodical would embrace a wide array of topics, from contemporary philosophy and literatures to questions of European national identity and democracy, to sociocultural issues such as ethnic identity, feminism, and religion. And so the scope of this journal was truly European, and it could have not been born outside of Trieste. And where everybody involved, right? So Gianni and Carlo Stuparic and Scipio Slataper, focusing on particular geopolitical areas. Slataper, in his vision, would explore the situation in Central Europe and in Northern Europe. Carlo Stuparic would focus on Western Europe, and Gianni Stuparic, instead, who had studied in Prague, would focus much more in Eastern Europe. He also imagined a lot of other collaborators who would add translations and cultural profiles, reviews for the languages that the three of them didn't cover. Women also, he included a lot of women, such as Elodie Oblat-Stuparic, she became then Gianni Stuparic's wife, and other women would help with translating text for this incredible project. But unfortunately, because of the impending war, the journal was never launched, and then there was the war, and both Carlo Stuparic and Scipio Slataper died in it. And I really do think that this project signals a yearning for a European union, for a European project that could provide a viable alternative to the cultural supremacy of the nation that we see then, take over with the war.
Yeah. How would you say this publication, your translation of My Karst in My City, contributes to, I guess, bettering our understanding of European modernism?
Well, I think it gives us a wider breadth to what modernism is. If you look at any current modernist anthology, written in English, right, published here in the States or in England, you will always find the usual suspects that go from Kafka to Joyce, Italian or French French authors have always very much included. But that's it. You have some German, lots of English, and lots of French. Italian texts are always almost completely absent. Pirandello might appear occasionally. Svevo, for instance, who is the other great Triestine author of that generation, rarely appears in those texts. And so by making Slataper's text available in English for the first time, I wanted to show another facet of modernism, one that is very much embedded in the multicultural milieu of Trieste of that time. Again, against the status quo of cultural and national identity that saw Trieste as a city, as an Italian city. Slataper recognized in his text the impossibility of creating a traditional, homogeneous Italian culture in a city that is full of contradictions and full of clashes. And so the text really reflects those clashes. He's asking, the beginning of the text is amazing. He says, I would like to tell you who I am. I would like to be perceived as somebody who has a whole totalizing identity, but I am not. I would be lying if I said that. And so I think that it is precisely in his attempts, in Slataper's attempts, to come to terms with himself, with his own identity, and identity of his city, as a modern metropolis, as a modern cosmopolitan metropolis. The Slataper really reveals a modern sensibility and emerges as a unique modernist voice that adds to the other voices that are already so established in modernist studies.
Yeah. So you mentioned these, I guess, clashes and tensions that Slataper wrote about. I'm wondering, when you were translating this text to English, what were some of the challenges of doing so, considering, there's just so much going on?
Yes, the language is definitely complicated, but the first thing that I like to mention is that the translation it was a collaborative work. I did the translation together with Nick Benson, who is a very gifted translator. And we worked together thanks to Skype, which today nobody uses anymore, and Google Docs. So we could communicate and translate together, the whole text. And so what are the challenges that we found translating this? Well, the first one was rendering into English the long, winding sentences typical of 20th century Italian prose. I mean, a sentence in Italy could be as long as a paragraph, and so we needed to deal with that. And so Nick and I decided that we needed to handle it, but at the same time, we had to remain true to the original. And we opted for two different approaches depending on what we were translating. So when we were translating his essays and his political essays, his cultural essays, we decided to break down Slataper's often convoluted style in order to convey his point clearly, still trying to preserve his thinking process. So we didn't omit parts of his work. We were just trying to break it down so that it resembled, so that we came closer to an English prose. In my Karst and my city, though, Slataper deploys a wide range of linguistic registers and styles that go from the disconnected futurist-like fragments to the sensual evocative prose typical of the Nunzio. And so here we instead decided that the prose and the style was so much part of the text that and so much part of the texture of the novel that we really wanted to be as true to the original as possible, altering the syntax only when it was absolutely necessary. And that was probably the the biggest challenge for us. Another thing that we encounter in my Karst in the city is the use of dialect. And so we had to think about how do you translate a sentence that is in dialect, so it's not in Italian, and from an English speaker. And so we decided that we were translating also the dialect parts, and just in the footnote put the dialect and say like, okay, this was in dialect, have notes that indicated that those were not originally written in a dialect. But it was a challenge, but also a fun challenge, a puzzle, to take care of.
That was so interesting to hear. Thank you for discussing with us this remarkable publication. Are there any closing remarks that you would like to say?
Trieste literature is very interesting, especially in this time of crisis. Is this time where you see the war breaking out in Europe again. Looking at these places, looking at those writers, and I'm not just thinking of Slataper here, but all of those writers who were active at Trieste in the 20th century, to going from Slataper to Claudio Magris, if you will. It's really trying to find alternative views to the nationalist project, so it's you understand that there is a big faith for instance, on Europe, on what Europe can, united Europe can bring. And that, to me, even today, is still something that is so essential to understand and to study. And that's why I think those texts have still something to tell us today.
I agree. Thank you again. My Karst and My City is out now. They're Agincourt Press. You can find it on Amazon as an ebook and on small press distribution as a paperback. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.